Nate talked about the intellectual framework that we have. And basically, that is when our memories begin to construct things. When things that happen to us, things that we go on through life, we kind of capture those things. And we start building this framework of what our memory is, of who we are, our identity. And so what's hard is that when we go through life and things happen, and we have this framework of life that happens, all of a sudden, for some of us, we look at life and we think, well, that's not really a story that I like reading. This isn't really a good story. Maybe your life has been like a drama. Some of you guys are like, yeah, I've got a cousin. Yeah, her life is a drama for sure. That's her story. She needs to be on TV. Maybe your life is a drama. Maybe nothing has been stable in your life. Maybe thing after thing after thing just falls apart, and you try, and you fail. Maybe your life is a tragedy. Maybe you've gone through life, and you've tried something, and just the worst thing ever happened. You had loss, there was death, there was pain. For many of us, we live life like a tragedy. For some of us, it may even go deeper, and it may be a horror story. Maybe things have happened to us that are just crazy, that we've never told anybody, that we've never let out in the open. And if we were to ask ourselves today, what does your story look like? We would say, well, it's a horror story. It scares me to think about it. And then maybe for some of us, if I were to ask the question, what is your story? You would say, it's a fiction story. You know, I act one way when I'm out and about and doing life or whatever, but I know when I come back home, I'm just living a lie. This isn't me. This isn't my story. I'm just living somebody else's story. But here's the good news. No matter where you're at, no matter what your story has been, no matter what those intellectual frameworks have built up, I just want you to know that God is saying He wants to come in your life and He wants to change your story into a love story. He wants to change those moments. He wants to be a part of you. He wants to be beside you. And so whenever you look at your life, whenever you look at your story, He's not going to say, oh, I wasn't there. God was there. 1 Peter 5:6-7 says this, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time. This is the good part. Cast all your anxiety on Him because, what? He cares for you. God doesn't say, cast your anxiety on me because I need you to do great things. God doesn't say, cast your cares on me, cast your whatever on me because, somebody told me to. God says, cast your anxiety on me. Give me those things because of the simple fact that He cares about you. And that's the only reason He needs. I want to challenge you guys today to let God rewrite your story into a love story. But I'm foreshadowing a little bit here because, every good story needs some foreshadowing, so you'll get it. Are you ready for a spoiler alert? Here's the thing. We are all the publishers of our story. Obviously, the only one that can live our story out is us, right? But here's the plot twist. And this is also the second question. Who's holding the pen? Who's holding the pen? Everybody say this with me. We choose. We choose. We choose. What do you mean by that? I'll explain. Thank you for asking. Some of us, every morning we wake up and we give our pen to anger. Some of us, we wake up and we give our pen to doubt or fear. Many of us, we wake up and we give our pen to loneliness or depression, maybe addiction. And for many of us, because this is the way that society lives and runs, we wake up and we take the pen ourselves. And we say, this is going to be my story. You know, when I was young, I was insanely blessed to have an amazing family that did everything they could do to help me. They drove me, they pushed me to be excellent in everything. And it wasn't a traditional family setup. There's not a whole lot of those anyway, but mine certainly wasn't. And I just remember thinking when I was a young kid, you know, my family, they're doing all this stuff, but I don't deserve this. I'm a nobody. I don't have any friends. I'm not good at anything. You know, my mom put me in sports. That was a bad move. Some of you guys know this story, but I'm going to do it quickly because it's funny. You know, so they put me at first soccer. Soccer was the first thing, right? So I had this position. It was called goalie's helper. Have you guys ever heard of this? See, I just found out about 5 years ago, this is not a real thing, okay? What the goalie's helper does is you basically stand as far away from everything as possible, right next to the goalie, and if the ball ever just happens to come to you, you pass it to the goalie. And that is your job. And I was even bad at that, okay? I could not. I was a terrible goalie's helper. So my mom was like, okay, that's not going to work. Let's do something else. Baseball, number 2, right? So I was out in the, not dugout, it's not a word. I don't know anything about sports. Field, out in the field, on the left side, right? That's what they say, right? Left field, yes, that's the thing, out in left field. I was out in left field, and while the game was happening, while people were doing their thing, you know, all these, you know, sport, you know, a bunch of Codys were out there, hit the ball, you know, running and stuff. And what am I doing? I'm picking flowers. Because when I was a child, I wanted to be an archaeologist, just like every 8-year-old wants to be, right? Because I was a cool dude. Not really. And then the top, the pinnacle of my sports career was football. So they put me in football. Many of my friends know this story. And here's the thing, I had a really bad like gag reflex back when I was a child, because why not, right? You know, to go along with the nosebleeds. That was my life, right? So every time I put my mouth guard in, I would throw up. Which would make it very difficult to have a football game when you put a child out there, because I was a child, because why do children play football? I don't know. They threw me out there. They said, go get him, Vasquez, or something like that. And I put my mouth guard in, and then I throw up, and they stopped the game. They said, okay, get out. Thank you. Please feel bad for me. These are all true stories, sadly enough. But here's the thing, you know, that was my life. And, you know, I was good at a lot of stuff, other things that nobody cared about, you know, computers and stuff. But, you know, I really dealt with loneliness, and I dealt with depression, and I dealt with fear, and I got angry because I thought, why can't I do any of this stuff? And I was very good at hiding it. You know, if you were to ask little 10-year-old Alex, what does your story look like? It would be fiction. Because on the outside, you could never tell. I was just a wall. And I had let everyone and everything write my story except for God. I had let everything and everyone but God write my story. In Joshua it says this, choose this day whom you will serve. And it's funny because the Bible doesn't say, okay, choose when you're a little kid who you're going to serve. It also doesn't say, hey, we're going to choose for you. No, God is a gentleman. So he asks us the question, who are you going to serve today? Because I have another plot twist for you. We all serve somebody. We all hand that pen over. It may even be to ourselves, but then we're serving ourselves. God is asking, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Every day when we wake up and a new page is turned over, who are we handing that pen off to? Because here's what I want to tell you guys today. God has imagined a beautiful story just for your life, but he's waiting for you to let him write it. God is ready. He's there. He's like, old Western. He's there, pen in hand, on his holster. And he's saying, I want to write your story. You know why? Because he's a better writer than you. He's very good. Jeremiah 29:11 says this, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. He knows the plans. He didn't say, for I'm going to do things to you. No, he says, I know, I've got plans for you. And these are my plans. It's for hope. It's for future. That's who we want to give our pen to. And I'll say the other thing, growing up, it was very difficult. And much like many of us maybe in this room, I grew up without a father. I grew up where, I'll be really honest, I don't think I ever actually blamed my mom or my dad for it. As a little kid, I just remember thinking, this is just how it is. Other people have dads or whatever. I don't. That's how it is. And I think I bottled that up for a really long time. But you know what? By the grace of God, God put, number one, an amazing family to help me through that. And number two, he brought many, many father figures in my life. And even when I wasn't ready to give God the pen, God was kind of like scribbling things on the side. Well, let's just help him out here a little bit. I'll finish that later. So number one, what is your story? God's calling it to be a love story. Number two, who's holding the pen? Well, I can't answer that, but you can. And then number three, and this is where I'm going to camp out for a little bit, is why me? Why me? See, it's really easy for us to look at stories in the Bible. We've all done it to some degree. And we can say, man, it would be really cool if I was like David or Joshua. Or God, why don't I have a life like Ruth or Esther or something? But the problem is, many of us, when we look at the stories, when we look at stories in the Bible, we see the whole picture. We see the beginning, we see the middle, and we see the end. Because most of us, if we were to just read the first half of most of those guys' story, we'd be like, oh man, that's not going to end well, right? But what does God do? He changes it around. He throws a plot twist in there. And then all of a sudden, we're like, man, that person, they're special. Here's the beautiful thing about God. He takes a person who starts with a very ordinary beginning, and then in a way that only he can do, he weaves the extraordinary into that person's life. So that at the end of the day, at the end of that story, people say, man, that guy, he's not ordinary. He is not an ordinary man. And there may not be a better example of this than Moses. You know why? Because Moses was born in literally the worst time ever, right? if anybody knows the story of Moses. When he was born, the Pharaoh had basically made a decree and said, okay, all the guys, all the boys being born, dead. We want them dead. Well, that's not too good of a news for Moses, right? Because he pretty much met those, it was very basic, but he was like, yep, he's one of them. So I'm going to read this real quick, just so we can get a picture. Acts 7:20. At that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. Remember that. For 3 months he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and in action. When Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Sometimes we like to do things that we think is good, and we make a call, and we grab that pen, and we're like, no, I'm going to do that. And then most of the time, what happens? It doesn't work out very well, right? Okay, I'm going to keep reading. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. Well, that stinks. The next day, Moses came upon 2 Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler over and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? Ouch, that's a burn. When Moses heard this, he did what every hero does, and he ran to the desert. So why would they say then that Moses was no ordinary child? Let's put this in context a little bit, because I know for me, I never really did until I really started diving into this. Imagine being a mother and seeing 20-year-old Moses walk down the street. If you had a kid or a boy that was supposed to be born around that same time as he was born, would you be happy when you saw Moses? No. What was Moses? Moses was a symbol to all those people of, oh, that's the one time when God came through to him, but not my son. I had never thought about that. Imagine being the only boy in your generation. Let that sink in a little bit. Every time you walked into a store, every time you did anything, people would remember when their son or their grandson was killed. That is not a good starting point for a great superhero message, right? But God has this amazing way, and we all know, a lot of us know how the story of Moses ends. When we entrust God with our life, when we give him our broken story, when we give him those things, even though they're messed up and we're like, I have no clue how you're going to turn this into anything, God has an incredible way to rewrite your story. And he can do things that we would never be able to do. Moses tried. He said, you know what? I'm going to be the guy. I'm going to be the hero here. And so he kills somebody, and then everyone's like, what are you doing, dude? This is not helping us. It's only when God comes in, and like I said, he begins to weave that story that he came up with, not us, is when things start to change. And I challenge the same thing would happen for you guys. That no matter where you're at, no matter what your story has said so far, that you can take that pen and you can give it to God, and you can say, hey, I messed up. I've been giving this to everybody else, and even I wrote a few things here and there, but now it's your turn. And it's a daily decision. Every day we make the decision. See, if you don't allow God to expand your borders, if you don't allow him to let you dream new dreams or to come in to your imagination, here's what happens. Our soul rigidifies. It hardens. And the sad thing that happens is we really think that, you know what? Maybe I'm not very extraordinary. Maybe I'm just an ordinary average person. Because the truth is, there's so many of us that go on through life, and although we are extraordinary, we live and we move and we die very ordinary lives. So fast forward to my life when I was about 18. I remember this moment when I was just going through life. And there was a certain moment when I said, you know what? I'm done with the ordinary. I'm done doing the same things. I'm done having excuses. God, you take it. You take my life. And it's been so amazing what God has done. Have I messed up since then? Oh, yes, many, many times. There's been times where I just take that pen back. No, we're going to do this. But it's been so amazing to see how God has moved in my life in a way that I can never imagine or work or dream or put together. And God can do the same thing for you. And even today, and even just recently, it's been incredible to see how God can move in my own personal testimony. I'm going to be a little bit selfish here for a second. So I told you, I spent the majority, almost 30 years of my life without a father. And I don't have a whole lot of time to get into the details. But through a series of events, and I really believe it's God's marking on my life as a testimony, I was actually able to contact and find my father. This is like 3 weeks ago. And I was very scared, I'll be honest. And it took me back to that little boy who thought, I don't need a dad. I'm fine. But something inside of me said, you know what, Alex? You need to pick up the phone and you need to call him. And so I picked up the phone and I called my dad, which is a weird thing to say because I've never called anyone dad. And we're like, hello? And so the first thing that he said, because he had kind of creeped on me a little bit on Facebook, like we all do. He said, Alex, I'm so excited that you're in Christ. And that one thing, that one moment, it's very easy to get weird about it and say, well, why would you let him into your life? Why would you do anything now after all these years? I've had people say that to me. But you know what? I want to rewrite my story through God. I don't want to let disappointment or anger or frustration be the thing that writes my story. And what's so crazy and what's so amazing is he has a beautiful family. And I just realized I have more brothers and sisters. I have a half brother and a half sister. The sister's just about to have a baby. And I'm going to be so happy for the day when my youngest, Judah, she's just 2 years old right now, 1 year old, whatever. I'm bad with the years. She's never going to know a time when that wasn't a thing. she's going to grow up having an abuelo. He's in Mexico, by the way. You know, Rome has asked me, my oldest son, he asked me, like, seriously, monthly, hey, have you found your dad yet? Have you found your dad yet? Hey, where's your dad? You know, he was really the reason, you know, that this happened. And it was so amazing to be able to go to Rome and say, hey, guess what, Rome? We found my dad. And I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit selfish here, but I want to give you guys a real example. When we give our pen to God, not only can he rewrite from now to then, he can literally take things that were so buried, that were so not even a thing, and he can bring life to those things. I would have never in a million years imagined that God could do something like that. And I'm a pretty big faith guy. But I had written it off, and I'd said this was not going to be a thing. But now, I have the ability, and I would say to you guys, you know, don't take it for granted, because I get a text from him every day now. I'm praying for you. Give me a list of things to pray for. We're all praying for you. He's watching me right now on the live stream. Hello. Because here's the thing, and this is a quote from Erwin McManus. He says, "You are God's instrument for creating the future only He imagines right now." See, what makes us different from everything else on this planet, what makes us different from the dogs and the bears and the cats, is that we have this amazing ability to imagine. And we have this incredible ability that through passion and through drive and through thinking and working, we can turn something that we imagine into reality. And when we match that up with God, when we say, God, you be the one that comes up with the ideas and I'll just run with you, then we can go further than we had ever imagined. We can do more than we've ever dreamt of doing. You know, a beaver is never going to sit there and say, you know what? I think I'm going to start building bridges. That doesn't happen. You know, an antelope doesn't sit there and say, you know what, guys? I've had enough of these tigers. We're going to rise up. That's not a thing that happens. But you know what? Humans have this amazing ability, especially through God, to be able to see something that doesn't exist yet and to change things. And so each and every one of you in this room, I want you to realize that you are not a normal person. And that when you die one day, people are going to say, you know what? Cody, he was no ordinary man. Mike was no ordinary man. But it takes a daily decision to hand over that pen to God. So the answer to my final question, why me, is because He created you to create. He designed you to design, because you were born no ordinary child. And so I'm going to finish my message with another quote. This was something that my father actually texted me on the first day. He said, life doesn't need to be perfect to be wonderful. And that stuck with me. You know what? I know we've all had stuff go on, every one of us. But God is saying, you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect to be wonderful. Because I can take the things that are broken. I can take this vessel that is destroyed and smashed, and I can create a beautiful masterpiece out of it. Life doesn't need to be perfect to be wonderful.